What's good, y'all? It's Coach Brody. And I don't always do this, but right now I want to tap into a little bit of some MBTI, some Myers-Briggs typology, because I am a fan of Myers-Briggs typology and a lot of different types of typology. Like, I'm a big fan of Enneagram as well. And a lot of other INTJs aren't going to like this, but I'm a fan of astrology as well, right? I don't get too deep into it, but I know at least my sun sign, my moon sign, my rising. You know what I mean? So one thing I want to say about it is this. I am an INTJ, right? That's my type. And one thing that I do want to express is that INTJs are not the most logical people, right? Like, INTJs are not the most logical people. INTJs are more rational than logical. And there's a lot of reasons for this, right? So let me define these terms first. And so when I went and Googled this online, one thing I saw is this: rational means, do you have a good reason to believe what you believe? And logical means the conclusion of an argument follows from the premises, right? Now, logical is going to stem more from the scientific method, but the scientific method isn't as tied down to a specific outcome or desired result. The scientific method is going to be a lot more harsh with the acid test when it comes to peer-reviewed studies and all of these different things. Now, there may be some INTJs that do these things, but this isn't always the case. And I can say this for myself, right? But this is also something that relates to many others, because I've had conversations with other INTJs, and it's not always, the most logical of arguments. So I'll say this: INTJs are rational, not logical. See, confirmation bias based on patterns found by the NI, which is introverted intuition, which can be heavily filtered through the trauma that influence the FI child moral code and value system, right? And the FI child is introverted feeling, and that introverted feeling is like the value system. It's your internal moral code, right? See, the arrogance of the INTJ perceived by others comes from the value judgments made by FI and NI, and people get frustrated by how the TE and NI relationship can create arguments that appear so ironclad and thought out that someone who isn't as deep of a thinker may not be able to catch the inconsistencies, although they can be felt by feeling types. Feelings have a logic behind them, but feeling types often may not seek to truly understand where the thought process comes from or the rationale behind it, so the INTJ can be easily very dismissive of those who haven't thought things through as much as they have. This is something I know is true for myself. This is why in a lot of my videos I say things are my opinion. I don't try to force the topic of truth on people. Many INTJs are very heavily focused on the idea of truth, but a lot of things are subjective, and a lot of our feelings and our ideas as INTJs are subconsciously influenced by our FI, and that FI that influences our decisions is often influenced by trauma and things we've experienced as life, as well as our NI and patterns that we've seen. So one thing I'll say is this: now, the INTJ is not simply an arrogant individual in many cases. The INTJ isn't too attached to their point of view, because the desire ultimately is to be right and to be consistent in the thought process. It's better to be consistent than it is to be right. If better information is presented, an INTJ will listen and seek to apply, research for themselves, or change their thought process. However, it's simply that if someone hasn't thought things through well enough to present a logically consistent argument to disprove the thought process of the INTJ will often dismiss it as emotional or cling to social norms that have no value to the subjective reality that the NI is seeking to bring into fruition through the TE, which is extroverted thinking. So if you're not overly familiar with the function stacks and with the different aspects of MBTI, when I say NI, this introverted intuition, that's the primary function of an INTJ. The TE, that's the secondary function, right? That's extroverted thinking, right? Then you have, FI, that's introverted feeling. Then we have SE, which is extroverted sensing, which is at the bottom of the stack. And one thing to understand is that many INTJs are often extremely introverted, right? Extremely introverted. Now, there are times where we may not appear introverted, because we've already used our NI and our TE to develop a system so that we know that we're competent, so that we're giving people good experiences, so that when we go into a certain environment where we already feel competent, we can appear as extroverted because we've already developed a system to know that we are competent in that particular field. Like for me, I get on YouTube. For me, I can go and perform. I have no issue performing or speaking public. For me, I can go be a dom on some BDSM shit because that's a lifestyle that I choose. But I took time to develop systems, to develop logic, to develop mindsets behind what I do, so that there are certain things that I do that may give the impression of being, extroverted when I'm not extroverted at all, right? See, INTJs are very obsessive when it comes to the topic of their interests, and the energy that others put into other things like emotions and adhering to social norms is energy that the INTJ places a singular focus into their worldview, right? So part of the reason that the INTJ can appear very introverted is because the energy that other people will put into adhering to social norms and thinking about their feelings and the feelings of others, we just don't have the energy for it because we're putting so much of our energy into our introverted intuition. And then when we want to step beyond that and bring that into fruition, that's where we'll go into the TE, which is the extroverted thinking, which will place our thought process through the acid test of seeing if it can work. See, that's why it's rational. It's not logical because it doesn't follow the scientific method completely. It's more so rational about can it work at all. And if we have enough evidence to say that it can work at all, and we've crossed our T's and dotted our I's about the pitfalls of what can happen with our thought process, then we are fully convinced that whatever we think and whatever we believe is completely right, and there's nothing anybody can say to us about it to an extent. So I'll say this. So most people who may disagree often will have disagreements that the INTJ has already thought about and thought beyond on several occasions. This doesn't mean that their point of contention is inherently wrong. It simply means that they can't articulate it well enough in the eyes of the INTJ for them to rethink their stance. So let's say I'm having a conversation with a feeling type. They may internally feel like something that I say is wrong, but if they can't articulate it well enough and cover an issue that I haven't thought about, then I'm not going to take what they say too seriously. I'll try to. But at the end of the day, I'm going to look beyond it and say, well, you haven't thought about the problems that I've thought about and thought of solutions to those problems. And if I've thought about solutions to problems that you haven't thought about, then everything that you're saying is bullshit to me, right? That's just how I look at it, right? And that's not always the right answer, but it helps you stay consistent in your own stance. So the energy that it would take to do so is often too much for most other types. So they'll shut down, which the INTJ will typically take as an admission of defeat or even rejection of the FI. And some will resort to logical fallacies to prove their points, with no true Scotsman fallacies, virtue signals, shaming tactics, and other arguments that the INTJ does not value. And I've heard this from people before, and this isn't 100% infallible system when it comes to logical fallacies. If you're an NI Dom, then you can probably understand how certain things that appear to be slippery slope fallacies, and this is something that INTJs are very guilty of, slippery slope fallacies, because many INTJs have this desire to give other people positive experiences, but without clinging to social norms. So with this mindset in mind, we will often jump to conclusions when we sense any level of disloyalty, when we sense any level of someone not getting with what we're talking about, because the FI child is our internal moral code, our internal moral system, and it's the emotional center where our feelings are, that we see the world view. We see the world through that system, and that system is not always going to be right, but it's going to be filtered through our trauma. So if we've experienced trauma, we've experienced things that traumatized us, that had a heavy emotional toll on us, then we're going to see that somewhat as a truth about the world in general, right? And sometimes this can be connected to like the anima for a man or the animus for a woman. So I'll say this: the INTJ is inherently paranoid and sensitive to manipulation tactics as well as inconsistencies in arguments and behaviors. Right? And I'll say this about the FI child. When it comes to the FI child, which is introverted feeling, our main thing and the main way that we show love to an individual as INTJs is to craft a worldview, to craft a system that will help improve the quality of our relationships as well as the quality of the lives of people around us. And when we craft those systems and we communicate those systems, if a person doesn't follow through with the systems that we present to them, then we have, sometimes we feel like we have no other choice but to conclude that the person is being disloyal, right? Like, it's like, say, you tell a person, okay, this is a way of resolving conflict. If they don't follow that system of resolving conflict that you laid in front of them, then we'll often take that as, okay, cool, this person is about to betray me pretty soon, or they've already betrayed me because they aren't being consistent. And then sometimes we'll go ahead and jump the gun on our desire to end the situation, end the friendship, betray them first, which INTJs can do. And we're not going to be right 100% of the time. And sometimes when we do that door slam, kind of like an INFJ, we put ourselves in a position where we burn a lot of bridges because we're trying to protect our energy. And when we burn these particular bridges, sometimes the backlash is going to be great. And the backlash may hold us back because for a lot of INTJs, the way that we relate to the world socially, we're oftentimes going to have extroverted friends that are going to help us as far as putting us in a position where we can, express our competence to the world, but we have to find a way to get it in the first place. And it's oftentimes going to be extroverted friends who are going to put us in that position. But if these people don't think as deeply as we do, or they don't account for our feelings, or they don't account or take our logic into careful consideration to really think about what it means and how it can benefit them, then it's like they're rejecting the main source of value that we're trying to add to them. And part of that pain and part of that frustration that comes with people from an INTJ perspective isn't necessarily that we think people are stupid. It's the fact that we're projecting the fact that they don't respect our logic onto them. Right? So not all, but many NI dominants will choose the internal patterns that they've intuited over clearly logical points. Right? So like it could be something like religion, or it could be something like either religion or atheism, right? And it's taking a very strong stance saying this is how it is, this is what it is, this is all it will ever be, and this is just the way I view the world, right? And someone who doesn't agree with that is just stupid. And that's something that we often do as a way of protecting ourselves from having to put too much energy into trying to find a convergence with this other person's thought process and respecting their point of view. See, people can be manipulated through random facts that don't actually lead towards a desired end. Now, I think that this is an important concept to understand, right? This is an important concept to understand. When you understand that logic or facts aren't always something that's going to lead to the ultimate truth, when you understand that, then you have a certain level of humility towards life, because even if there's facts that present something, you can use the same exact facts in a different way, with a different explanation, with a different way of interpreting that data, and it can point towards a completely different conclusion. But because we're in our DOMs, we're going to use those facts through the extroverted thinking to strengthen what we've come up with through our introverted intuition, to develop some form of a universal worldview or some form of the patterns that we feel, right? So INTPs, for example, may be a lot more logical than INTJs, but because they typically aren't seeking to directly apply it to an internal thought pattern or goal, it is much easier to be more logical about topics, seeking out peer-reviewed studies and scientific evidence. So for me, if you ever notice in my videos, I mostly do rants, right? Most of the time in my videos, I don't write them down. I just talk. because with introverted intuition, it's kind of like being Batman. I'm going to use my introverted intuition to see patterns, and then I'm going to obsess over those patterns. And I'm going to obsess over those patterns until I come up with a system. And then after I come up with those systems, that's when I'm going to apply the acid test through extroverted thinking to see what can apply, to see what can be a rationale, to see what can work. And once I feel like these things have worked for me and they've worked for others, then I'm going to express my thought process to the world. That's not completely the scientific method. In a way it can be, but it's not completely that. That's why I say that a lot of things that I say in my videos are opinion, right? But when you're so based on just what are the facts, then oftentimes you may be living from a completely different system than the system that you're expressing to people. See, an INTJ would be more likely to pick or create a system that pushes them towards the subjective desired result rather than an objective undeniable truth. It's this tunnel vision that makes an INTJ effective, but also not completely based in logic. The INTJ is often going to be seeking to prove their theory that they've developed through NI right, through putting it through the TE acid test. But the scientific method isn't as tied down to what the desired result has to be. The INTJ only needs enough information and experience to justify their thought process being something that can work or be consistent, but that doesn't make it the only way or even necessarily the best way. And when I talk about different things like having a program, when I talk about game, when I talk about, masculine, feminine dynamics, dom, sub dynamics, creating my worldviews, my processes, my thought patterns, I'm not saying this is the only right way, but this is something that I think I've put more thought into than most people. So if most people were to come to me and disagree with me, chances are whatever disagreement they've made, I've already thought about that disagreement and I've already come up with solutions and then moved beyond that point. Now, if they haven't thought about the disagreements and solutions for the problems that go beyond that point, then I can't completely respect their worldview, right? If they're coming overly with virtue signals and value judgments about my worldview, right, that's based on social norms or based on emotion that isn't tied to something that's going to create positive results, then to me, I look at it as inferior. That's just the truth of the matter, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong, but it just means it may not be right for me. That's all that it means. But it's like if you haven't thought of solutions to as many problems as I have, and this is something that's going to be difficult for an individual who isn't as much of an NT or an NJ, then it's going to be very difficult for me to look at this situation and say that your point of view is right. Now, if they've thought of solutions to the problems that I've presented that I can say are consistent and can be seen consistently within their actions, then even if we have different points of view, I can still respect their thought process. But that's a respect when it comes to going your separate ways. That's a respect when it comes to agreeing to disagree. But that's not necessarily a respect when it comes to changing my point of view. So I just wanted to break this down. This is why INTJs are rational and not logical. It's Coach Brody. I'm out.